we are excited to have Blake Mathys here from the Ohio Dominican University to present on Owls of the Olentangy. So without further ado, I will take down my screen here and allow him to share. Blake, how are you?
Good. Thank you very much for having me.
Hey, our pleasure. We're happy.
Okay, you can see everything fine?
Yes.
All right, so I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight. Thanks for the invitation to speak. I'm going to be talking about my new OWL project. So I'll be talking first just a little bit about who I am, how I got interested in this. At the end, I'll talk about how people can get involved. I'm really excited about it. It's really exciting to be getting into the time of year when a lot of these owls will be around. And so I hope you enjoy everything, and I'm excited to hear your questions when we get to the end. So just a quick review of kind of who I am. My background, I went to Ohio Northern University, was a biology major, did a minor in field biology. I got my PhD at Rutgers University, and I was looking at the evolution of birds that have been introduced to islands. So I got to go a bunch of terrible and boring places like Bermuda and Trinidad and Puerto Rico and Hawaii. It's kind of a cautionary tale about why you should never get into biology. But then I discovered that when I got back here to Ohio, that we don't have very many tropical islands with these introduced birds on them. And so that's part of what's leading me then into this owl research, is that I can't really pursue this previous line of research as much. In addition to the field work for my PhD, I was also working as a few years as a field technician in various places. So I got to work for Ohio EPA, sampling fish in the Sandusky River watershed. Got to spend a wonderful couple of months working with elephant seals on the Farallon Islands in California. 2 summers down in Everglades working with an endangered subspecies of the seaside sparrow down there. And then I also counted migrating hawks in Washington State up on top of a mountain. In 2012, I started working at Ohio Dominican. If you're not familiar with Ohio Dominican University, it's in Columbus. It's very near the airport. It's kind of a nice campus because we have Alum Creek running right through the middle of campus, which means I can take my students out of the classroom and be in Alum Creek literally in 5 minutes. And so it's a nice kind of natural laboratory on campus. And it's been my job to take all the students who are going to become, well, at least think they're going to become medical doctors, and make sure they get dirty at some point and find out that biology exists outside of the human body. All right, so more importantly, perhaps for what I'm talking about tonight, I like a lot of people, I guess, have a long-term interest in owls. When I would go birding, of course, owls are some of my favorite birds to see. After I started working at Ohio Dominican, one of the first things that I began doing is having owl walks, where I invite people out to the farm that I live on in Union County, and we walk around aimlessly in the dark and try to find owls. We've been successful every year we've had an owl walk in finding at least one owl. And so I've had this kind of long-term interest and experience with owls. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit about the biology here. So when we think about looking for living organisms, we find that there's a kind of a big diversity in how we do that. Some species are relatively easy to find, that we can look around, we can see them, they're pretty obvious. And for those sorts of species, there's a variety of different ways that we can survey them, that we can count them, that we can find out where they are. And recently, citizen science has become a really important tool to try to help understand where those species are found. For birds, the kind of main citizen science initiative, there are a variety out there, Great Backyard Bird Count, feeder counts, etc. But eBird has been kind of the driving force behind citizen science when we're looking at bird populations. And so if you're not familiar with eBird, it's basically just this database where anybody can report sightings of birds. So if you're walking down the street outside your house and you see a bird fly over, you can go to eBird and say, hey, I saw this bird on this date in this location. And that information all goes into this giant database of bird sightings. Though that database then is accessible to the public, can be used for lots of different types of research. And for a lot of species, this is a very effective way to keep track of populations. So for example, if you go to eBird's website and type in American robin, you will find that there are a lot of sightings of American robins. Many, many, many hundreds of sightings. Specifically, for example, if we might look at Paradise, we would find lots of people have seen robins there and have reported that. In the example here, all those sightings are just from 2020, and there's a lot more going back through time. And so we would find that if we clicked on most of those points, we'd find lots of sightings and lots of information about American robins. The database also takes that information and puts it into some other forms that are really easy to use. For example, they have these bar charts. And so here's an example of American robins for the state of Ohio. It gives you some idea of how common they are through time, as well as some other various species of thrushes and so forth there. You can also graph these data with something like this line graph. And so what you can see here is these are the total number of robins that get reported through the state of Ohio by week. And what you see is there are, in many cases, hundreds of thousands of robins being reported. And so for a species like the American robin, this is a really good way for us to keep track of things like long-term population trends, to keep track of where they're being seen. Now, what I'm looking at with this project is that for some other species, maybe these sorts of citizen science amalgamations of data are not going to be as effective. So specifically, I pulled up the eBird map for long-eared owls. Long-eared owls are a really neat species, and I was looking for long-eared owl reports near where I live in Union County. And here's what I found. Unlike that American robin map with points all over the place of robins everywhere, well, there's really just a couple of points. And in fact, for all of Union County, there's only 2 locations that have had reported long-eared owls. And if we start looking at these reports, what we find is the one that's kind of in the middle of the screen there, well, that was a long-eared owl that I reported. During a Union County Bird Club trip to Keckley Park, we saw a long-eared owl that had been chased around by some blue jays. I put it into the database. The other point, which is just a little bit higher on the map there, if we take a look at that, well, that was a long-eared owl that spent 4 days on our property. One that happened to show up, probably migrating through, spent 4 days and then moved on. And so I looked at this and I thought, well, I can't be the only person to have ever seen long-eared owls in Union County. That these 2 data points cannot be representative of either how many owls are there or how many owls have been seen. And so this got me to thinking about how this works when we start thinking about species that are not as obvious as something like an American robin. And so first I thought, well, why are owls so difficult to find? Even if they're there, we often don't know it. And well, the answers are pretty obvious. They often choose places that might be difficult to locate. They're very well camouflaged. They tend to only be active at night. And for a lot of species, aside from during the breeding season, they're relatively quiet. So they're not going to announce their presence to us. So that means that a lot of the owls that are around, even though they're present, probably they're not going to get noticed. Now, even if they do get noticed, in a lot of cases, owls don't get reported. And so even if you see an owl, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to tell anybody about it. And that is especially true because of how likely owls are to be affected by disturbance. So in a lot of places, owls are relatively hard to find, are relatively rare, and are not seen very often. And so when an owl gets reported, it often attracts a lot of people. Now, this is a picture from a rare bird that was reported in England. But what we see here is hundreds of people lining up to see this rare bird. And it turns out that that's something that happens relatively often with owls, that when an owl gets reported, people like to see them. And people will often go look at those owls, and in some cases, those owls will be disturbed in a way that might be detrimental to that owl's well-being. Maybe that bird will be scared away. Maybe in the middle of the day, people will get so close to it to try to take a photograph that maybe it won't be able to hunt. Maybe it will be scared and move to another location, and maybe in that move become more susceptible to being eaten by, let's say, a hawk or maybe another owl. And so because of that possibility of disturbance, in many cases, in order to protect the owls, people who see owls say, well, I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't want this owl to be harassed by people coming to see it and photograph it and interact with it. All right, so if that's the case, and we're going to have a tough time finding owls, and even if owls are found, they may not get reported. Well, I started to think about, well, how do we find these species that are difficult to find, that are secretive, that hide well, that are well camouflaged? And so I started to think about the various approaches you might take to try to get a better idea of how many of those individuals are around. And one of the first things that jumped to mind is automatic cameras, right? Get things like game cameras. Attached to the side of a tree, let it take pictures. This is a picture of a coyote here on Ohio Dominican's campus. I've worked here at Ohio Dominican for about 9 years now. I've never personally seen a coyote on campus, but we have a lot of pictures of them from these automatic cameras that we've put out there. Those automatic cameras are observing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, taking pictures of whatever comes by. That ability to constantly monitor has resulted in a lot of really impressive discoveries around the world of species that were thought to be extinct or not known to be in an area being discovered. All right, so that's one approach to trying to find hard to find animals. Something else that we often do is some sort of trapping. So for example, here's a cute little mouse that I caught here on Ohio Dominican's campus. As you walk around on campus, are you likely to see a mouse? Well, no, but we know they're here. And if you put out, in this case, these live traps, you can catch them. Also, a lot of species leave tracks. And so by walking along in, let's say, a muddy area or the snow-covered ground, we can see those tracks and we can know that a species is present. Here's an example of a publication from a few years ago where the striped hyena was rediscovered in Armenia, partially based on the presence of these tracks that were found. Lastly, another that I thought of is for some species, we can use dogs. I included a cute picture of our dog there. That's our dog, Finn. He's good at finding species. And of course, we have some cases where dogs are specifically trained to help find specific species. So for example, if you want to see a mountain lion, yes, you can spend a lot of time wandering around in the forest, but if you really want to find one, your best chance is to use tracking dogs that can track those down. All right, so these approaches to finding these rare species, I then thought of when we're talking about owls. And what I pretty quickly realized is that none of these approaches is going to be very effective at finding owls. Yes, you can put up camera traps, and certainly they can get pictures of owls and do, but because owls are able to fly, it's tough to kind of choose that pathway they're likely to take, which would be more easy to do with most mammals. Trapping, again, is possible, but is relatively time intensive, and you have to have a pretty good idea if the species is there to begin with before you try to trap it. Otherwise, you'll be trying to catch things and maybe not even be in an area where they're found. Yes, owls certainly do leave tracks, but it's relatively rare. And finally, dogs are not that great at tracking things that spend most of their time flying because they aren't leaving a scent trail on the ground. All right, so when I added all this together, I thought, well, we don't have a great way to keep track of these secretive, of these hard to find species. So that's why I decided to start the Central Ohio Owl Project, to get a better idea of where and how many owls are wintering in Central Ohio. to try to keep track of these difficult to find birds. Now, for the species I wanted to focus on, I had to narrow it down a little bit. So here in Ohio, we have 8 species of owls that occur every year. There's a few other species that might rarely show up, but there's 8 species that are here at least every year. And of those 8 species, we can kind of divide them into some categories based on some aspects of their biology and their abundance. So I'm going to start by talking about the species in the top right corner there. The eastern screech owl, great horned owl, and barred owl. These 3 species are probably the ones you're most likely to run across if you see an owl. It's most likely to be one of these 3. They are relatively common and have relatively large populations throughout Ohio. They are year-round residents, so they're not migrating. And so these are sort of the expected owls. In basically any wooded area in the state of Ohio, you're probably going to find at least one, if not all 3 of these species, even including places like urban areas. Barred owls, for example, are really well known in a lot of the metro parks in Columbus, that they are really easily found and relatively common. All right, so my next 2 owls I wanted to talk about then are the snowy owl and short-eared owl. You may have heard of the snowy owl in Delaware County. That's been there for a little while now. Every year we have snowy owls show up in Ohio. They are here only in the fall and winter, and are relatively uncommon, but like the short-eared owl, are relatively likely to be active in the daylight. And so snowy owls and short-eared owls, although they may not be considered common, are relatively easy to find because they are more likely to be active during the day, dawn and dusk. And in both species, you may see actually out moving around, being active during the day. So in other words, relatively easy to survey as far as owls go. So that brings me then to our last 3 species, the long-eared owl, saw-whet owl, and barn owl. These are the 3 species on which my project is going to be focused. And one of the main reasons for that is because of how secretive and how difficult to find these owls are. That these owls tend to be strictly nocturnal. They tend to choose areas to roost in that are very, very well concealed. And so they tend to be very hard to notice. They aren't the owl that you're going to accidentally stumble upon as you're hiking through the local park, that you're probably going to have to be looking for them to actually find them. So these are the ones that we are least likely to know when they're present, and then therefore least likely to know how many of them there are around and where they're located. So I wanted to talk about each of these species in a little more detail, just to kind of introduce the biology of them, to help understand why they're hard to find and think about kind of who they are and where they might be. I'm going to start with a northern saw-whet owl. This is the smallest owl that occurs in the northern part of the continent. So these are smaller than a screech owl, it'd be around 8 inches long. In Ohio, there are a few individuals that breed. They may have been a more common breeder historically. There may still be a few around. They are a secondary cavity nester, meaning that they can't build their own tree cavities, but they have to use holes in trees that were created by something else. In the case of the saw-whet owl, it seems to be that they will often use holes made by northern flickers or pileated woodpeckers. They will eat a variety of small mammals, but especially like Paramiscus mice. Those are the white-footed mice and deer mice. One of the ways to know that there might be a saw-whet owl around is if you see half of a mouse laying on a branch. That saw-whets are small enough that they'll often eat just half of the owl eat half of the mouse at a time. And so if you see the back half of a white-footed mouse on a branch, look around, there's a good chance there's a saw-whet owl around. They are a rare breeder in Ohio, as I mentioned, but we mainly have them here during migration and in the winter. So they are a relatively common migrant through Ohio, although we see very few of them. And that's largely because they choose to roost in places where it's very difficult to locate them. In thick evergreen trees, tangles of grapevines, places where you're unlikely to notice them, even if you're looking for them. Many more individuals migrate through Ohio than stay here to winter, but they are certainly a wintering species, at least in some areas of the state. They are not considered a threatened or endangered species in Ohio, but they are a species of special interest, partially because we just don't know that much about how many of them there are. The next owl I'm going to talk about then is the long-eared owl. Long-eared owls are found all around the northern hemisphere. They, like the saw-whet owl, may breed in Ohio, but breed relatively rarely. They use old hawk and crow nests. They will in fact often drive away hawks or crows to take over their nests. This is kind of surprising because it turns out a long-eared owl is actually smaller than a crow. They have a big personality, they have a big appearance, but their crow size are a little smaller. They also are going to be eating a lot of small mammals and are going to be roosting primarily in evergreen trees in the winter. They can be found in lots of places. This picture on the slide here shows one roosting a hardwood tree, but they will often be in evergreen trees. This is another species of special interest here in Ohio, which again may be a more common breeder than we realize, but it's difficult to find them. The third species for the project is the barn owl. Barn owls are found worldwide. They're found on almost every continent. They're very common in some places, rare in others, but you're pretty likely to find barn owls no matter where you go. In Ohio, they're a relatively rare breeder. Their population in Ohio is in the hundreds. It has increased quite a bit. The ODNR Division of Wildlife worked, especially in the 90s, to put up a lot of barn owl boxes, and that has increased the population quite a bit. They will eat quite a few rodents, and as their name suggests, they are especially likely to be found in structures. So old barns, other outbuildings, old silos. They will also use evergreen trees and other sort of vegetation to roost in, but are especially likely to be found in structures, in buildings. They are considered to be a threatened species in Ohio because their breeding population is so small. It's larger than it used to be, but again, numbers in the hundreds. This is a species that could potentially increase quite a bit with an increase in the number of nest boxes provided, but they are somewhat limited by the habitat that they need, because supposedly they need to have about 40 acres of grasslands to hunt on at minimum in order to support barn owls in the area. All right, so I took a look at these three species and tried to think about the best way to figure out how many of these were around, how to find them. And I came up with primarily a two-prong approach. Targeted searches, so going out and looking for them, and then also asking for sightings, asking for people to report owls. I'm going to start with the targeted searches. And my basic idea here was that, you know, when I drive around, I see a lot of areas that I think, boy, there should really be owls in those woods. I really would like to check that stand of pine trees over there and see if there are any owls present. And so my plan is simply to check those trees. I've started contacting private landowners and saying, I'm doing this project. I would be interested in surveying your property to see if there are any owls present. I will keep everything entirely confidential, but seems like you have good habitat that could potentially support owls. Would it be okay if I come in and take a look for owls in those locations? As I started really planning this project in the spring and summer, I started to realize that there are a lot of these potential locations. And so I've been sending out a lot of letters to landowners, and most of them have given me permission to check these locations to see if they might have owls. So that's what I'll be spending a lot of my time doing this winter, is traveling to these locations and carefully searching to see if there are owls present. The second part of my approach then is to ask for sightings. I assuming that there are more of these owls present than what we hear about, I'm assuming that more people are seeing them than what we hear about. And so I'm especially interested in finding people from the general public who might know that they have a barn owl living in their barn or roosting in their silo, but not know where to report it. Or might notice a saw-whet owl spending the day in their spruce tree in their backyard, but not realize that it's anything of interest to anyone. And so I want to get those people to know that, one, I'm interested in hearing about those sightings, and then also report those so that I can kind of get a better idea of how many of these owls are present. In order for that to happen, Ohio Dominican has put up an online form that explains a little bit about the OWL project, what I'm trying to do with it, and then provides the opportunity for people to put in the information about an owl that they've seen, upload a picture, provide some information about owl sightings. And so one of the things that I'm going to be doing as we get into the winter is to trying to publicize this project as much as possible so people know that there's a place to report these sightings. Of course, also then making it clear that it'll be kept strictly confidential, that you're not going to have random people showing up at their house trying to see the owls, that it will be used for the research only and will not be publicly disseminated. To get that news out to people, I'm going to be relying, of course, on a lot of social media. So Ohio Dominican's marketing department put together a graphic that I'm going to be sharing on social media to try to get that in front of as many eyes as possible. The Electric Cooperative magazine that goes out statewide is going to have a one-page article in their January issue about the project and publicizing the ability of people to report sightings to the project. All of this hoping that more people will hear about it, more people will know that it's something of interest, and more people will be interested then in reporting sightings to the project. My general hopes are that we'll learn a lot more about how many of these owls are really around. That, like I mentioned, my 2 sightings in Union County can't be all the owls, all the long-eared owls that have ever occurred in Union County. I want to get a better idea of how many are actually there. This will also provide a way to kind of test eBird to see how good of a job eBird is doing at keeping track of these relatively rare, secretive, and sensitive species, like the 3 species of this study. Additionally, once we learn more about where these owls are found, it may be possible to increase their population of owls that are breeding in Ohio by doing things like providing nest boxes for saw-whet owls and nesting platforms for long-eared owls, and then the boxes in structures for barn owls. That if we know that the owls are in an area that are wintering there, that their habitat's apparently appropriate for them, that providing things like nesting platforms might encourage them to stay and nest in that area where they might not have otherwise. It's been found in a lot of areas that they're most likely to nest in areas where they were present as a wintering species. Okay, so that brings me to how you can help. So a lot of this project depends on getting the word out to people, right? If you hear of somebody saying, oh, you know, I noticed an owl in my barn last week, say, oh, you should report that to the Central Ohio Owl Project. You know, there will be the opportunity to share the graphic that I showed you on social media, just to make it generally awareness of the project. If you see an owl, make sure you report it. The project, I'm accepting owl sightings of all species throughout the entire state. So report whatever owls you see. Even if it's not in technically central Ohio, or if it's not a saw-whet, a barn owl, or a long-eared owl, I want all the owl sightings that I can get. The next thing you can do is make an active search for the owls. For many of these species, you're probably not going to notice them accidentally going about your daily life. I mean, it's possible, but there's a much better chance if you actually get out and look. Go check those spruce trees in your backyard and see what might be in there. Listen for blue jays being upset about something and check out and see what it is. They might be upset that there's a long-eared owl roosting in the tree. If you know of locations that seem like they might be likely to hold a population of wintering owls. And these would be especially things like a thick stand of evergreen trees, especially if it's near some grassland areas where it'd be good hunting. If you know those locations, if you see those locations, if you notice them driving around, either check them yourself, obviously getting permission from the local landowner, or let me know. Just send me a note and say, hey, there's a really nice stand of evergreen trees at this address. It could potentially hold owls. And I will then contact the landowner, ask for permission to come out and see what I could find there. So those locations are really going to be key for the success of the project, because the more locations that are checked, the more owls that are going to be found. Now, I have been getting some publicity over the last few weeks, so I've started to get some results. As of today, there have been 396 owl sighting reports submitted to the project. And so there are reports coming in, multiple reports every day of owls that people have seen. They are a variety of different owls from a variety of different places, but there have been some really interesting and sort of unexpected reports. So for example, a couple of Saw-whet owls have been reported. The picture on the left by Brittany Graff, she reports that she went out to get in her car to go to work in the morning up in Cleveland, and there was a small owl sitting next to her tire. It flew over into the bushes, and then she was able to get this picture of it. When she reported it, she said it must have been a baby owl because it was so small. And I said, well, that's great. This is a Saw-whet owl. It's actually, not a baby, but it's migrating through. She was not familiar with owls, not familiar with Saw-whet owls, but was really excited by running across this owl, and is exactly the sort of thing that I'm looking for, where people would know about these owls being present, but not realize it's anything of interest or anything special. That it's something, for me at least, that I think is really special. I'm really interested in hearing about those. In addition to going out and looking for owls yourself and searching for owls, there are some other opportunities. The biggest one is that I'm going to be, well, have been and will be in the future, catching and banding Saw-whet owls. And so Saw-whet owls are, these great little owls that it turns out it's possible to capture them during migration by playing their sound. They get attracted to the sound and then eventually fly into a net. And so this year was a little rough because there was this virus situation, but next fall I will be again trying to capture Saw-whet owls and banding them, and we'll be, assuming conditions are better by then, opening it up to the public, and so you could have the opportunity to come out and see that whole process of catching the owls, banding the owls, and potentially have the opportunity to hold a Saw-whet owl. The owls are captured, banded, and released relatively quickly, but this gives us a way to keep track of them, to learn where they go and what they do. This year, I caught one owl that had originally been banded up in northeastern Ontario earlier during the migration. It was about 500 miles away that owl had traveled before I caught it at our farm in Union County. And then also one of the owls that I banded ended up being caught again in southwestern Ohio down near Cedar Creek. And so it's kind of neat to be able to see those owls up close, and also to realize that there are so many of them migrating through Ohio, and we don't realize it. I will also mention that owl banders in Ohio this year have caught about 500 Saw-whet owls. So again, much, much more common than we realize. All right, I have some acknowledgements. I have to especially thank the Columbus Audubon. Columbus Audubon has provided funding for the research, so I'm very thankful, and also helped to publicize it, and have just generally been supportive. Ohio Dominican's Marketing Public Relations Department has been providing those graphics and getting the website up and running and making the database and all that. The landowners who've agreed to allow me to look for owls on their property, and then the public who's been reporting these hundreds of sightings that I have so far, are of course essential to the success of the project. And so with that, I will answer any questions if anybody has any. Thomas Audubon has provided funding for the research, so I'm very thankful, and also helped to publicize it, and have just generally been supportive. Ohio Dominican's marketing public relations department has been providing those graphics and getting the website up and running. And
Babe, can you help
database and all
me?
that.
Yeah, what do you need me to do?
The
I'm
landowners
trying
have
to
agreed
get this
allow
to
me
go
look for owls on their property, and the
mute.
public who's been reporting these hundreds of sightings
Alexa,
so far are, of course,
mute the Fire
essential to
TV.
success of the project.
Yeah, anybody on the call here, you can unmute and ask a question at any time. Blake, where is it that you do, if you're able to say, where is it that you do your owl band,
My owl what?
your owl banding?
So I'm doing it at our farm in Union County, which is, we're about an hour northwest of Columbus.
Yeah, great. I didn't
So
know if it was part of BSBO or if it was something you were doing separately.
No, this is a separate location. There was nobody really banding saw-whet owls in central Ohio, so I decided to do it at my house, also because it's a lot easier to do it at my house.
Yeah, awesome.
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
This is Rich Bradley. I was wondering, are you using playback to try to attract owls or sentence them at all?
At this point, no. I'm just going to be focusing on, visual surveys, looking for pellets. We'll see how that goes. I might add some sort of playback surveys in the future.
Or smile. Well done. This is great. With old friends or new ones.
Turn the volume off.
Good job. Then let it all out. It's never been easier to connect, learn, and have fun.
No, but turn the volume
So let's do it together.
off.
Awesome. Good to see you. I just want to let you know that. Blake, while we're waiting for some other questions here, I was wondering, we were talking about mostly conifer trees for things like the saw-whet. Are you finding that they're also roosting? Well, I guess my first question is, what height are they roosting at?
So that's a good point. And I probably should have mentioned that earlier. So saw-whet owls have a tendency to roost relatively low. Often they'll be 2, 3, 4 feet off the ground. They can be up maybe 20, 30 feet up in a tree, but they're often sort of eye level. They stay relatively low. They are also very unlikely to flush off of a perch. And so they tend to just kind of sit there as you walk up to them, and all of a sudden you might notice that there's an owl right in front of you. The long-eared owls tend to be higher up in trees, tend to be relatively close to the trunk, so will often be 25, 30, 40 feet up. And then barn owls have the tendency, especially when they're roosting in old barns, they like to get all the way up on top of the hay rail, up at the very peak of the barn. And so if it's an old barn that doesn't have great lighting and it's real dark up there, it can be very difficult to see the barn owls up there. And so for all of these species, to find them, it does take some time and effort to really look carefully, to examine the location, look for things like pellets that might provide some hint that those owls might be there. But they are extremely good at hiding.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned the saw-whet looking for really heavy coverage. Are you finding or getting any reports of them hiding in something like kudzu or winter creeper or any of those invasives?
That's a good question. The answer is no, but I think that there's probably a little bit of bias here. I've read some studies where they've done like radio tracking of saw-whet owls, and they find that when they're roosting in places like vines and that thick deciduous vegetation, that they're so well hidden that you just can't see them there. That even if you have the radio transmitter that's reporting there's an owl over there in the brush, that they're in such a location that they're just almost impossible to see. I think it's easiest to see them when they're in the evergreen trees, because when they're roosting in other sorts of vegetation, they're in just the thickest, most difficult to find places.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's good to know.
Hi, I have a question. John Kinsley here. I'm just wondering, what is your target in terms of number of sightings? What are you hoping for? How many sightings submitted, each year? What are you looking for?
As many as possible. I mean, I'm looking for maximum coverage to have as many people out looking and reporting as many sightings as they possibly can. There's no number that's too many.
Are you taking sightings for owls outside of your project zone here? So
Yeah,
birds or great horns or
yes, statewide, any species of owls.
all right. I'm going to take a look at our Facebook page here and see if we've got any questions going through the comments. If anybody else has got something they'd like to ask Blake.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
I'm kind of concerned about the privacy of the owl. So whenever we report an owl to you, how specific do you want the location?
It doesn't necessarily need to be extremely specific. I am asking on the form for like a zip code or township level. So it's not necessary to have the actual, address. I'm not planning to, go out and try to see every single owl that gets reported.
Okay, but you might go try to verify our sighting.
Well, yeah, that could happen. If that was the case, if I was, unsure or wanted to be absolutely positive about it, then I would, of course, contact you and say, would it be possible for me to make a trip out and take a look at the owl?
Okay. Are you also gonna would you like to have a picture?
Yes, yeah. So on the form, there is a place where you can upload a picture. So if I get a report with an uploaded picture that, and I have discovered already that owl identification is difficult. A lot of the pictures that I've had uploaded have not been the owl that people thought they had seen. And so, yeah, the picture definitely goes a long way towards me being sure that that's the owl in question.
Okay, and will an iPhone picture be, I know it's not ideal, but that may be all I have. All right.
Yeah, as long as you get a picture, most of the time pictures are at least identifiable to species.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, Blake, Debbie wants to know what sort of evergreen trees she needs to be looking in for Saw-whet.
So they can be in any sort of evergreen trees. I've seen them primarily in spruces and pines. They especially like cedars, but they can really be found in any sort of kind of thick cover evergreen tree.
Yeah.
To follow up on that evergreen question, a lot of my evergreens, aside from the red cedars that are in my area, are evergreens that have lost their lower branches. And so it's only upper branches that are still there. So would you say that it's not worth looking for a saw-whet in those typical trees?
Turn your thing off.
Yeah, so when the trees get older and taller like that and the lower branches die and fall off, it is less likely you'll find owls in there. I mean, the good news is that if you have an owl that's spending very much time, there will be pellets that they've regurgitated. So it can be relatively easy to just kind of walk around and see if there might be any pellets on the ground to let you know then if you need to look more carefully up above the pellets to see if there might be an owl. But those older trees are less likely to hold owls of any of these species.
If we hear an owl but don't see it, do you want a report of what we heard?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you have a recommendation on field guides or call guides for owls?
So any modern bird field guide is good for owls. I do know that the Division of Wildlife has their Owls of Ohio guidebook that also comes with a CD that has owl sounds on it. And so that can be a good resource. It is Ohio specific, so it has a lot of information about Ohio owls and specifically where they're found. So if you can get a hold of one of those, it's just ODNR Division of Wildlife, Owls of Ohio CD Guidebook. That is a really good resource. Certainly Cornell's website, All About Birds, has a lot of good information, a lot of good recordings. That would also be highly recommended.
Yeah, those are definitely the two resources I use most often. Laura would like to know about placing owl boxes in suburban, urban areas. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so in suburban and urban areas, if you're going to put boxes in, it would probably be best to put in screech owl boxes. Those would be the species that you'd be most likely to have in that area. Screech owls use boxes really easily, and so certainly would increase the number of screech owls in your area if you put up even one box. They will probably find it that first year.
That's awesome.
I have another question.
Sure.
Are you going to harvest data from the Christmas bird counts?
Yeah, yes, I'm looking at all the sources of data I can. So I'll be looking at Christmas bird counts. I'm going to contact wildlife rehabbers. I'm going to look at university museum collections. I'm going to try to put together as much of that as possible. But yeah, Christmas bird counts I know often have at least long-eared owls get reported on there. So I would definitely be keeping an eye on those.
Yeah, I mean, I think we get screech owls, barred owls, and great horned owls almost every year in most of the central Ohio counts.
Yeah.
But I was just going to suggest you might contact the compiler so they will tell you to have people note where in the count circle they saw them, so it'll be most useful for you. Because most of the time when we're reporting owling, we're not actually reporting the exact locality of each one of the owls.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I think a question that goes along with that, James is asking if there's a way on eBird to post about the owl without making it entirely public.
And the answer is yes. There's a few different ways to do it. One way you can do it is you can post just at like the county level. So you can say, I saw an owl somewhere in the county. You can also just wait, see an owl, wait 2 months and then post the report. And then I think there is an option to make things hidden, or at least hidden for some time period. So yes, things can go into eBird without having that potential problem of people showing up at your doorstep trying to see the owl.
Yeah, that's good information. Yeah.
Because yes, I've definitely heard some unfortunate stories of people trespassing and people doing things they shouldn't in attempts to see owls.
Yeah, speaking of that, Bill would like your opinion on the snowy owl at Alum.
I don't know. From what I can tell, I mean, I haven't been to see it, but it seems like it's probably doing all right. Yes, there are always going to be, if you have hundreds of people doing something, there's going to be a few who make some mistakes. But from what I can tell, I think that owl is probably going to be fine. It wouldn't surprise me if it disappears before too long, if it hasn't already, because it seems, in my experience in the past, it seems like snowy owls in Ohio that show up in the fall often don't stay for the entire winter, that they kind of disappear somewhere along the way. But that owl seems to be okay from everything that I know about it.
Good, yeah. And then we've got one more question here. Let me see who it's from. If anybody on the Zoom call has a question, feel free here. All right.
I have a real quick question. I'm kind of curious of your experience with banding saw-whet owls. What is popping up in those nets other than saw-whets?
So far, the only other thing I've gotten is one screech owl. But this is my first fall doing it, so I'm just really getting started with it. But yeah, I had one screech owl that I caught and banded, released it, and an hour and a half later, it got it caught in exactly the same net. So I guess it didn't learn that much, but I haven't seen it again since then. So maybe it learned after the second time.
That's awesome.
Well, great. Hey, we've got a question here in the comments. Can you own an owl? And not a wild one, for sure, right? You can't own a wild owl.
But yes, I think, yes, you can own some of the foreign species. Yeah. But I think there's some paperwork, I believe.
Yeah, I'm almost certain there is. Yeah, you can't go out and trap one and call it your own. Yep.
No.
So, hey,
Even though
perfect.
my students always want to do that, every time we catch anything, they ask if we can keep it, and I always tell them no.
Excellent. Well, hey, Blake, I can't thank you enough for doing this evening and taking time away from your family, right away from home, staying in the office late here and giving us this presentation. Any last words you want to give out?
Just if anybody, you want to be involved, you want more information, feel free to send me an email. I have my address there on the screen. Get in contact with me. The more people that are interested in this, that are participating, the more owls that will be found and the better conclusions I'll be able to make. So I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, definitely take down Blake's information here. And if you are looking to get a hold of him and can't find, whatever you've written this down on, feel free to reach out to Terradice. We will put you in touch with him for sure. And if you know somebody who wanted to make it to the presentation tonight, but didn't get a chance to, you can send them to our YouTube channel. Well, this will be up probably later on tonight here. So you can catch up on this and any others that we have put on this year. Perfect. I just saw one more question come up, Blake.
Sure.
How long will you be taking information this year?
So I'm focusing on the wintering owls. So certainly through March, but I'm hoping to do this for multiple years. So I guess I'll take reports whenever you have them.
Awesome. Well, fantastic. Hey, my clock says 7:30. So let's get everybody, let's get everybody home. All right, Blake. Hey, we appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Blake.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.